Okay, so now we're ready to start Unit 3. I know that I'm still finishing up the grading from Unit 1. You're still finishing up Unit 2. Like I said, in a summer session, some of you like to work ahead, so I try to get things posted early when I can for those who like to work ahead. And then it seems like there's a little bit of catch up with the other units, which is okay. So I've graded all the quizzes from Unit 1. And they overall were really good. I was so pleased with them. There was a couple of people who had a little bit of issues with the true false and the multiple choice, but hopefully now that we've gotten through that first batch of quizzes, you're feeling more comfortable, you know the type of things to be looking for, and that should be easily resolved. The issues with the essay, one of them was a few people just simply didn't do the essays, and of course that's going to impact your quiz grade. The other issue with the essays were people deciding either not to answer all parts of the essay prompt, which is a problem. When you have multiple parts, you want to make sure you address all of it, or not giving enough information and analysis, having way too generalized or vague responses that doesn't show a clear connection to what was in the readings. And the essay instructions do ask for 2 to 3 paragraphs, and so to answer them fully with analysis and examples, you do need to have that amount of information. I'm still finishing up grading the discussion forums. Like I said in the announcement message that I sent, especially for the first unit, this generally takes me a full week. I spend a great deal of time reading through what you've written and trying to get a good feel for where you're at with the materials and how I can give suggestions to better improve. In general, your initial posts have been really, really well written. They provide great information. The issues I've found so far are similar to the essays, where it's too generalized and vague, or don't answer all parts of the prompt, don't respond to all parts of the prompt. The other issue I've found is some people simply deciding to write just on something that interests them, something from the reading, which while that's interesting, it doesn't really help to push along the discussion, because you do have an essay prompt that people are looking towards and people are wanting to respond to. In your response post, the biggest feedback I can give at this point is that you need to interact with the content of what your classmates have written. That's what's really going to make this a discussion, not just being complimentary or saying you agree or asking a question. That wouldn't work in a classroom setting either, and it certainly doesn't work online. So make sure you really work to interact with the content. Okay, so moving on to unit number 3. Unit number 3, we're going to get into a little bit more of a period of modernization and stabilization in the Hispanic world. It might not last a really long time, but it's there. We've just gone through all the chaos, right? The independence wars and the infighting between the liberal and conservative factions, or federalists and centralists, and then the rise of the caudillos, these political strongmen, often military men who brought some stability, although through more of a draconic setting. I wouldn't call it dictatorial. They weren't really dictators, but they were single men rulers who ruled through a cult of personality. So now, in the late 19th century, we're moving forward politically. We're moving into a period where the Hispanic countries are creating more stable constitutions and better political processes, a little bit more maybe democratic, at least more participatory as such. Part of this comes because it's a period of economic decision making. How do they move forward and grow their economies? And part of this would come through a basic industrialization, mainly in the areas of railroads and telegraphs, although some countries like Argentina and Chile and Brazil and Uruguay and others would have more of a burgeoning industry. And so they would use this to grow their economies, grow their nations. And in Chapter 5, we'll see these things happening, see the impact they had not only on individual nations, but really also on relations between nations, how it would affect the way they work together or against each other, how it would impact borders, how it would impact national development. Then we have chapter 6, and chapter 6 gets into a part of this history, this culture, where I have to start to make some disclaimers. Anyway, chapter 6 is called New Actors on an Old Stage, and it looks at new players in Latin America, both within countries and from outside of their borders. Okay, so with the industrialization, we have the rise of new social classes in the Hispanic world. This is when we will see for the first time a true working class in these countries. This is not peasants. These are not people who are out working the countryside, who are farming. These are people who are moving into cities or moving into certain areas to work together in an industry or on the railroad. And they have kind of a shared culture through their industrial work, right? And this brings about a new consciousness and a new class. It would also bring about the rise of the middle class, right? So we see these two new classes that were small, but they would begin to have an influence in the region. The big player that we see emerging in this time period is the United States. And this is where I make my disclaimer, because I'll generally get comments every semester from students about the book seeming to be maybe a bit anti-American, or why there is so much about the negative involvement of the United States in the book, in PowerPoints, in documents, and supplemental readings. Why I have that in my PowerPoints. It's not about anyone being un-American or anti-American by any means. I certainly am not. I'm very proud to be an American. I'm very proud of the freedoms we have. But I'm also aware, as a historian, as a Latin American scholar, that sometimes these things have come at a price, and at a price to other nations, right? Especially in certain periods of our history, we have secured or upheld some of these freedoms at the expense of other nations. Sometimes in the name of national security, we have taken actions that help our national security but have hindered the security of other places. And since this class is on Hispanic culture and the Hispanic world, we need to look at things from their perspective, from their ideas, the ideas of the Hispanic world. And you have to be aware of how they view themselves and how they view others involved in this history, and that means also how they have viewed the U.S. involvement in their history and in their region. And starting in the late 19th century, this means we examine the role of the United States. And we're going to examine it a lot from their perspective. And when you see some of the U.S. attitudes, not the U.S. citizens, you see some of the things the U.S. governments have done, and also U.S. companies. U.S. companies and multinationals and industries have had a huge impact on the Hispanic world. And when you see some of these things, you have to realize that their impact has not always been positive. Sometimes it's had very negative effects on this region. So I just ask you to please keep this in mind and develop an awareness of how our government or how our industries impact other countries, and how that kind of affects the way that Hispanic culture has developed, and how the Hispanic world views our government and views our companies. And then I also ask you to be willing to openly discuss this with respect to differing opinions. People are going to have some strong ideas and strong opinions on this, and you're not all going to agree. But this shouldn't be an argument, right? This should be an open discussion where we share our ideas and we get differing ideas from one another. And I am going to make sure this happens. So treat each other with respect, right? If you disagree, that's fine. People do that in the world all the time, but we're going to do this in a respectful and scholarly academic manner, okay? So your work is the same as it is for the other units. You have your quizzes on chapters 5 and 6. That includes the readings from Latin American Interpretive History and from Consider the Source, the Documents Reader. And then you have your discussion forum. And in the discussion forum, you're expected, as usual, to post at least twice. You make a primary post starting your own thread, and then you have to respond to at least one of your classmates. And as always, I suggest that you try and follow your own thread so you can respond to others as they respond to you. And if you have any questions, as always, please contact me. You know how to find me. I'm always willing to have online meetings. I respond to email very quickly. I love moving forward with this class, so I hope you all enjoy it.